Hello, everyone. I'm Alice Park, Senior Correspondent with TIME, and I'm joined today by astronaut McClain and Félix Lajeunesse, the director behind the ISS Experience, an immersive documentary series filmed on and around the International Space Station. This series is a collaboration between TIME Studios and Felix and Paul Studios, and the first episode debuts today on Oculus. Anne and Felix, welcome to TIME 100 Talks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So both of you are involved in this project bringing virtual reality to the space station. And Felix, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us about the ISS experience and why you feel it's important to capture life in space in VR?
So Space Explorers, the ISS Experience, is an immersive series about the reality and challenges of life in space. This is a project that has been produced over a period of 2 years aboard the International Space Station in cinematic virtual reality. And it's considered to this day the largest media production ever filmed in space. We had the opportunity to work with 8 international astronauts for this production, including McClain. And the project is really designed to make audiences feel like they're there, living in space alongside the astronauts. I think it's important to talk about space exploration for a number of reasons. First of all, I think that astronauts in space and their perspective in relation to watching the Earth from above and what it triggers emotionally and psychologically inside of them, I think that is extremely inspirational, extremely powerful, and something that we want the world to hear about today, especially given the context of the world as it stands today. And it's one thing to hear astronauts talk about that. That's pretty powerful in itself, but it's a whole other thing to actually feel like you're there with them, experiencing that with them simultaneously in real time. And so I think that that's what this project brings to the table, is to really transcend the screen and sort of give audiences around the world a ticket to go to space and to live with the astronauts in a way, and to get that unique perspective on the world that the astronauts live in and on our human world down on Earth.
And you're a lieutenant colonel in the US Army, you're a helicopter pilot, flew missions in Iraq, and you now also have the distinction of being one of the first to use a virtual reality camera in space. From your perspective, what part of life in space did you feel as an astronaut was most important to capture for people to experience and understand?
You know, what's interesting is that what I liked about working with this particular camera, this particular project, is that, you know, so often when we do outreach from the space station, we set up a camera on one view, we talk about one topic, and then we turn off the camera, and that's kind of it. This camera we would set up, it was kind of this big, you know, like round 9 camera contraption, the ISS Experience camera. And we would set it up and we would actually just kind of forget about it. We would just go about our daily lives, and it was looking, you know, forward and backwards and into each of the modules. And so I think what's really neat about it is that it captures not just the small frame that you've probably seen a lot from the space station up to this point, but you can look left and right and behind you. And, you know, I got to preview this episode, and half the time I was looking behind me because it's all the stuff that you wouldn't normally see that is really intriguing. It's the part about not just working in space, not just putting on a production for a camera, but actually what is the mundane, everyday living in space? And so for me, it felt like I was right back on there. It's also a little bit like having a camera in your house. So there was a couple times that I looked around and I went, holy cow, this place is a mess. We should have picked that up before we filmed, but it really does immerse you back onto the space station.
Did you have expectations, Anne, going in about what you wanted to or thought they wanted to film? And did those things change when the camera actually arrived and the filming actually started?
Yeah, so we had, you know, you guys came up with Felix and his guy came up with this big list of like things that they would be interested in, but they gave us a lot of free rein to say, hey, we don't really know what we're not asking for. So go ahead and set it up at other times. So we said, hey, let's set it up for a movie night. Hey, let's set it up when there's 2 of us working here. Let's set it up while one of us is doing an interview and somebody is literally floating around right behind him and working, because, hey, that's what we usually do. And so when we first got the camera, we were treating it more like a normal camera, a normal PR. We were saying, let's dedicate something to the camera. But I think some of the best shots that I saw during this first episode were ones that we just said, hey, the camera has 45 minutes left of battery life. Let's just leave it on and let it capture whatever it happens to capture. And those are some of the scenes that I think that it really got incorporated when we weren't really paying attention to it anymore.
Felix, I've had the pleasure of seeing the first episode, and you're an Emmy Award-winning director specializing in VR experiences, but all of them have been on Earth. It struck me, how did you do things like location scout and set up shoots when you're 240 miles from your subjects?
Yeah, look, it's been a truly singular and unprecedented experience for me. So first of all, well, NASA has been very helpful in providing to us, documents and 3D models that would allow us to understand the environment that we're filming in, even though we're not physically there, like the astronauts. So generally, the way that would go is that we would come up with ideas, a series of ideas for scenes that we want to capture in space, and ideas for where we want the camera to be positioned, in which orientation, because you can always change orientation, right? You're in a microgravity environment, as well as notes in regards to lighting. But then once that brief gets relayed through NASA to the astronauts in space, they really become the ones in charge because they're the only people up there. And so it was fascinating to me to see that after we delivered the brief, the astronauts, they have to play so many roles. They become the directors of photography. They become the camera operators. They become the sound people because they have to put their own mics. They become the data transfer technicians, to send the files to Earth once a filming has wrapped. And they also become, as Anne alluded to, creative collaborators because it's their story that we're telling. So they will have a great creative input to bring to the project. And ultimately, on top of all that, they are the protagonists of the story. So not only are they the full film crew in a way, but they also become the protagonists that are being filmed. And so it's definitely a great intensive collaboration between Earth and space. But at the end, I was just fascinated by how much falls in the court of the astronaut to make a project like that possible.
And Anne, I was just curious about whether there were any particular experiences or events that you felt were very important to capture and that you really wanted to make sure were part of this film.
Yeah, one of my favorite things on Space Station that I never really thought about when I was on Earth, and I don't really know why, but that's, the Space Station is about a 3,500 square foot living space on the inside. And we are always so careful when we're working in mission control, supporting the astronauts on station. We're always aware of where they are, what they can touch, what they can kick, what they can't kick. But what's interesting is that when all the cameras go off and all the science, the day-to-day science kind of halts for the evening, and you turn the lights off, you're living in the exact same place that you were just working all day. So the same place that had 100 eyes on it just a couple hours before, it's now your living room. And one of the most special moments for me, and I remember waking up the second morning I was, or the first morning I was on Space Station, and you get up and you go to the bathroom just like you do on Earth, right? So I got up and all the lights were off, and it was just some ambient like LED lights, and I'm floating through this amazing space station, and there I am with messy hair and pajamas on, and it's dark, and everybody gathers around, and we each grab a coffee, and we say good morning, and we kind of wake up slowly. And I thought, all those little moments that you have on Earth when all of us are getting ready for our days, that's the stuff that happens in space too. The other thing that we really wanted to capture was how much goes into some of the pictures that you see that you're so used to seeing. A lot of people have seen pictures or imagery or video of astronauts out on a spacewalk. Well, what does that actually take? Did you know that it takes 8 hours just to get us out the door in the morning? And then when we come back, there's another 3 hours of work afterwards. And so we were able to set up the camera and capture all of it. And not giving anything away, but there's moments in the first episode where you're seeing me before a spacewalk, getting the last like little bit of orange juice that I was going to drink before I went out. And those are the moments that go, wow, these are humans. This is you, this is me. It's just like any other human getting prepared to do this thing. And those off-script moments were really something important to share.
And of course, you mentioned a spacewalk, and you were, of course, one of the astronauts who was going to be the first all-female crew to do a spacewalk. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there and how you felt about that?
Yeah, I felt great. That was actually my call. I was the U.S. lead up on Space Station, and as part of the U.S. lead, one of my responsibilities is to mitigate risk at all times. And I was a helicopter test pilot before this, and we always look at 100 different sources of risk for any high threat operation that we're going to do, whether it's doing a spacewalk or whether it's flying a helicopter. And what you always want to do is evaluate everything. And then you want to make sure that your risk posture, that you never accept a risk that you can mitigate, right? And our crew mixes are one way that we mitigate risk. And so, to be honest, when I was looking at the crews and I was looking at the tasks and I was looking at who was doing what, and we talked to my crewmates, and I said, it just makes sense to swap these two. It actually gives us a better, it reduces our risk. It never even crossed my mind. Gender never even crossed my mind. And I called down to the ground and I said, hey, I think we're going to swap the crews on these ones. And the ground team looked at it and they said, yep, that's great. And it wasn't until a day or two later that somebody picked up that it was supposed to be the all-female one. It was not something that crossed my mind. And maybe that's actually a good sign for everybody, is that, I was the lead, it was my decision. I made that decision and we all went on with the mission. Because the thing with NASA is we don't set out to make records. We don't set out to make news. It's what we set records along the way by accident. But in order to do so, we always have to be focused on the mission. And so that was a mission decision. It wasn't disappointing. Everybody did the same amount of spacewalks that we were all supposed to do. It's interesting to me how it's been portrayed in the media. I think it was a real success story, and we later had the Jessica and Christina doing the all-female spacewalk later that year because they were the best crew members and the best pairing to go out on that day.
And Felix, of course, in January, as part of ISS Experience, you're planning probably your most ambitious shoot yet, filming that spacewalk in VR. So why is capturing that so important?
Well, the experience of the spacewalk in general, when you look at an astronaut's mission, is certainly a climactic point. I mean, a lot of the astronauts have testified that to us. It's also really great to be inside of the space station, but you can't help thinking, hey, what would it feel like to actually step outside in the vacuum of space and be there, flying above the planet with the astronauts? And that has been an image that we've been, thinking about since we started this project. So we actually had to design a separate camera system that we call the outer space camera that was just sent to the International Space Station about a few weeks ago. And that camera is designed to operate in the vacuum of space. So that camera is going to be taken out of the space station. It's going to be attached to the Canadian arm, which we will use as a sort of a quote unquote giant cinema crane in space. And we're going to be able to follow a full spacewalk from the moment the astronauts come out of the space station, following them at the different work sites where they will go on the space station until the moment that they come back. And so I think audiences will get to experience really being there with two astronauts, because the camera will generally be at a 7 to 8 feet distance from the astronauts. So it will make you feel like you are the third crew member performing that spacewalk. And then the camera is going to spend a few additional days outside of the space station to film planet Earth and to film exterior shots of the space station as well. And so that's going to conclude the sort of 2-year of photography of the ISS experience. And that will be the end of that filming process. So we're finishing with the most, challenging and risky filming process, I guess.
And I know there's probably a lot of complexity that goes into that, but I'm just very curious about what additional issues or challenges you have for an outer space camera versus the one that's inside the space station.
Well, first of all, the camera is subjected to the absence of pressure of space, so that's one thing. And then there's a huge delta of temperature, so the electronics need to be able to function, from minus 100 degrees Celsius to plus 100 degrees Celsius. And so the camera needs to be built in aluminum covered in Teflon to be able to resist those pressure temperature changes. And so that in itself is a huge challenge. It's a very hostile environment for any electronics to really work. And so we need to really design the technology in a way that will be able to resist the vacuum of space. So that has been obviously a huge part of this process, is designing that technology and building it and testing it over months and months to make sure that it's going to function before it actually flies to space.
And I'd love to ask your perspective. You're obviously a very well-trained astronaut, spent many years training. How far away are we from the American public being able to live for a sustained period of time in space?
Well, I think, our commercial spaceflight industry is developing extremely rapidly, and it's actually probably a lot more advanced than most folks realize. NASA is one of our goals is the commercialization of low Earth orbit, not to do it ourselves, obviously, but to enable commercial industry. And part of that, I do think, is going to be passenger flights. There's multiple companies looking at doing passenger flights or private astronaut missions and things like that up to space. Something that I would caution is that I think NASA is very good at making the very difficult look routine. I think, when folks watch space launches, or they see us up on space station every day, or they hear we've been living up there for 20 years, it might be easy to think, oh, well, we've got that figured out. We already know how to do that. What I think we've gotten good at is problem solving. And we have a multi-layered problem solving technique with our mission control systems, having backup mission control systems. And every single week there is a problem that has to be solved in a very creative way to continue to sustain what we're doing. And so, we want to enable the safe exploration of space and visiting of space by everybody, right? I would love to see passenger flights up to space. There are certain safety measures that have got to be put in place because what we're doing every day certainly is not routine yet.
Felix, you've also mentioned how your goal is to bring people to space and give them the experience of being there without actually going. How do you personally feel about space travel? And given the opportunity, would you also be interested in spending several months in space?
Yes, I would definitely love to do that. Look, I chose a career as a filmmaker, and then as I started creating films, eventually I became more and more interested in immersive filmmaking, which led me to eventually virtual reality filmmaking a couple of years ago. And when Paul and I, the co-founder of Felix and Paul, when we started to really play with the medium of virtual reality, and when we discovered the immersive power and the sensation of presence that this medium could provide, we immediately thought about space, and we said, we have to find a way to get that technology and that medium to space. And we have to make that the technology that will enable billions of people to actually virtually travel to space. And since then, we've been working relentlessly to achieve that. So I believe that my involvement in human space exploration is going to be creating that access, that media presence-based access to space. Not going there myself, but enabling people to go there virtually. I want that to be my contribution.
And before we wrap things up, we have one of our Time for Kids reporters, Miguel Madero, who would like to ask Anne a question. Miguel, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Miguel, a TFK kid reporter, and my question for you, Anne, is, I'm really interested in astronauts and space. So what advice do you have for kids like me? And what role do you think young people should play for the future of space exploration?
Well, that's a great question, Miguel, because when I was your age, and actually even earlier, I was about 3 years old when I looked up to the stars and I decided that I wanted to be an astronaut. And that's when I first told my parents. So just the fact that you're enthusiastic about it, that is actually the first start, because all of the future astronauts are doing exactly what you're doing every day. They're getting up, they're going to school, they're learning what they can, they're taking lots of different subjects. And so what you're doing right now is actually exactly what you should be doing to come and be part of space flight. Now, for anybody that wants to come and be an astronaut or to do any of the many, many, many different jobs that we have at NASA, the biggest thing is to figure out what you're passionate about and what you love doing and do that. Because if you're passionate about something, you're going to be better at it, because all of what we do, it takes so much more work than I ever anticipated. When I looked up and thought, I want to be an astronaut, I didn't even see half of the work that it was going to take to get here. Evenings and weekends and not going out with my friends when I wanted to and canceling trips and just focusing on my work. That's what it takes, but that's worth it if what you're doing is something that you love and that you're passionate about and that brings you joy. Because the other part is that, there's so many different jobs at NASA, like I said, not just within the astronaut corps. Within the astronaut office, we have doctors, we have scientists, we have geologists, we have pilots, we have people that are not pilots, we have scuba divers, we have submariners. We have all sorts of different ways that you can become an astronaut. However, we also have a ton of people that work at NASA and they get to work with space exploration every single day, and they're not engineers and scientists. We have educators that go out and they tell the story. We have media and public relations people that tell the story and do the interviews and make the videos. And these guys are the same people that they also get on helicopters and they fly over to Kazakhstan and down to Florida and they see launches and landings, but they tell the story. And so whatever your passion is, you can be part of this if you'd like to. But my biggest thing is to not give up. Do not give up. I run into a lot of adults that say, you know, I wanted to be an astronaut, but they say, but I stopped, but I decided not to, but I decided not to major in engineering, but I decided it was going to be too hard, but I decided to go do something else. And what I realized was most adults stopped pursuing it themselves. Nobody came and said, hey, you're not good enough. Most people gave up themselves. And so what I want you to think about is keep making the decisions that move you onto that path, because somebody sitting in your classroom today is going to be an astronaut, or a classroom just like yours is going to be an astronaut. There's the same with the president and the doctors and the lawyers and the professional sports players. They're all sitting in school right now. So it's those people that stay focused on their mission and keep making those decisions about doing things that they're passionate about that are the ones that end up where I am and where other successful people are. So good luck and don't give up.
Thank you, Miguel, for that great question. And thank you, Ann and Felix, for joining us on Time 100 Talks today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.